I was halfway through my morning coffee when I saw three people in expensive suits marching up my driveway like they were about to foreclose on the White House itself. That's when I knew my peaceful Saturday in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, was about to get interesting. My name is Quentin, and I'm a district court judge in Maricopa County. I'd moved into the Sunset Ridge community 6 months ago, thinking a quiet neighborhood would be perfect after decades of courtroom drama. The house was a beautiful Spanish-style single-story with a red tile roof, surrounded by desert landscaping that I'd carefully maintained according to every single HOA rule in their 47-page handbook. I'd read that thing cover to cover the day I moved in, highlighting every regulation like I was studying for the bar exam all over again. But apparently, that wasn't enough for Wendy Sheffield, the HOA president who'd made it her personal mission to make my life miserable from day one. It started small, a warning letter about my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. Never mind that it was the exact same shade as every other mailbox on the street. I had to repaint it with their approved vendor at 3 times the normal cost. Then came the complaint about my front door wreath during Christmas, claiming it violated the holiday decoration guidelines because it was 2 inches larger than the permitted diameter. I measured it myself with a tape measure. It was exactly within specifications. The violations kept coming. My trash cans were visible from the street for 12 minutes past the pickup time. My garden hose wasn't coiled properly. My porch light was allegedly too bright, even though it was the same wattage as the builder-installed fixtures. Each complaint came with a fine, and each fine came with Wendy's sickeningly sweet signature at the bottom, followed by 3 exclamation points like she was having the time of her life. I tried reasoning with her at HOA meetings. I tried being polite. I tried ignoring her. Nothing worked. She seemed to have a personal vendetta, though I couldn't figure out why. I'd later learned from my neighbor Tom that Wendy had wanted to buy my house for her daughter, but I'd outbid them by $10,000. Apparently, that was enough to earn her eternal enmity. So when I saw 3 lawyers walking up to my door that Saturday morning, briefcases in hand and expressions serious enough to prosecute a war crime, I knew Wendy had escalated things to a whole new level. I was still in my pajamas, which consisted of old sweatpants and a faded Stanford Law t-shirt. But then I remembered something hanging in my closet, something that would make this encounter a lot more interesting. I practically ran to my bedroom, yanked open the closet door, and grabbed my black judicial robes, the same ones I wore every single day in my courtroom, the same ones that commanded respect and silence from everyone who stood before my bench. I threw them on over my pajamas, cinched the front, and checked myself in the mirror. Perfect. Authoritative, dignified, and absolutely guaranteed to confuse the hell out of whoever was knocking on my door. The doorbell rang just as I was adjusting the collar. Then it rang again. Then someone knocked, 3 sharp raps that suggested they weren't used to waiting. I took a deep breath, composed myself with the same calm I used before entering the courtroom, and opened the door. The effect was immediate and spectacular. All 3 lawyers, 2 men and 1 woman, took a synchronized step back. Their expressions cycled through confusion, surprise, and what looked like genuine concern that they'd somehow knocked on the wrong door and interrupted a judicial proceeding. "Good morning," I said, using my courtroom voice, the one that carried authority across a packed gallery. "How can I help you?" the woman recovered first. She was in her mid-40s, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she held her briefcase like a shield. "Mr. Quentin, Quentin, that's correct. I'm Patricia Morrison from Morrison, Chen and Associates, These are my colleagues, David Richardson and James Fletcher. We represent the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. She paused, her eyes clearly taking in my robes. Are we interrupting something? Just my Saturday morning, I said calmly. Is there a problem? David Richardson, a tall man with graying temples and wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. He pulled out a thick manila folder from his briefcase. Mr. Quentin, we're here to serve you with formal notice of legal action. The Sunset Ridge HOA is filing a lawsuit against you for multiple violations of the community covenants, conditions, and restrictions, as well as failure to pay accumulated fines totaling $8,300. I let that sink in for a moment. $8,000 in fines. For a mailbox, a wreath, and a garden hose. I see, I said. And this requires 3 attorneys to deliver. Patricia's jaw tightened. The HOA board felt that given your refusal to cooperate with previous notices, a firm legal presence was necessary to convey the seriousness of this matter. My refusal to cooperate, I repeated slowly. I've responded to every single violation notice. I've made every requested change, most of which were completely arbitrary and some of which were later reversed by different board members. As for the fines, I've disputed each one through the proper channels as outlined in the HOA bylaws, and I haven't received responses to those disputes within the required 30-day window, which, according to Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33, Chapter 16, means they should be considered void. The 3 lawyers exchanged glances. James Fletcher, the youngest of the 3, may be in his early 30s with an eager expression that suggested he was new to this kind of work, spoke up. Are you an attorney, Mr. Quentin? I smiled slightly. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile I used in court when someone was about to learn a very expensive lesson. No, I'm a judge, District Court of Maricopa County. I've been on the bench for 19 years. The color drained from James's face. David and Patricia maintained their composure better, but I could see the recalculation happening behind their eyes. This wasn't some random homeowner they could intimidate with legal jargon and expensive suits. This was someone who understood the law better than they did, who spent every working day interpreting statutes and regulations, and who had absolutely no patience for frivolous litigation. I see, Patricia said, her tone considerably more cautious. Well, regardless of your profession, the violations stand, and the HOA board has voted to pursue legal remedy. Have you actually reviewed the violations? I asked. Or did you just take your client's word for it? We've reviewed the documentation provided by the HOA board, David said stiffly. So you haven't independently verified any of the claims. You haven't measured my mailbox or my wreath. You haven't checked the actual brightness of my porch light against the HOA specifications. You haven't reviewed the timestamps on the trash collection complaints. You just accepted what Wendy Sheffield told you and decided to file suit. Mrs. Sheffield is the president of the HOA board and a respected member of this community, Patricia said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. Mrs. Sheffield has filed 17 complaints against me in 6 months, I said. That's one every 10 days on average. In that same time period, according to the HOA meeting minutes, which are public record, she's filed a total of 9 complaints against the other 237 households in this community combined. Would you like to explain to me how that doesn't constitute harassment? James was now actively taking notes. David's expression had gone carefully neutral, which in my experience meant he was realizing his client might have misrepresented the situation. Patricia, however, wasn't backing down. The frequency of complaints doesn't invalidate their merit, she said. Each violation has been documented with photographic evidence and witness statements. Witness statements from whom? Wendy herself. Her daughter who wanted to buy this house but was outbid. I crossed my arms. I'm assuming you're planning to file in Maricopa County Superior Court. That's correct. Then you'll be filing in my courthouse. Not in my courtroom, obviously. I'll recuse myself from any case involving my personal interests, but in my courthouse, where every single judge is a colleague of mine. Judges who will not look kindly on what appears to be a very clear case of HOA overreach and harassment, particularly when the defendant is one of their own, and can cite chapter and verse of Arizona HOA law. The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. I could practically see them doing the math, calculating how much their firm stood to lose if they pursued this case, and it went sideways. HOA cases could drag on for years, and if they were on the wrong side, they'd be billing hours that would never be paid when they lost. "Mr. Quentin," David said carefully, "perhaps we've gotten off on the wrong foot here. Would you be willing to meet with Mrs. Sheffield and the HOA board to discuss a resolution? I've tried to meet with Mrs. Sheffield multiple times. She's refused every request. I've attended every HOA meeting where my violations were discussed, and I've been told to wait outside during the deliberations, which, by the way, is a violation of Arizona's open meeting laws for HOAs. So no, I don't think another meeting is going to solve anything." Patricia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression shifted slightly. "Excuse me for one moment." She stepped away from the porch, phone to her ear, and I could hear the murmur of intense conversation. David and James stood there awkwardly. I didn't invite them in. I just waited, still standing in my doorway in my judicial robes, radiating the kind of patience that came from sitting through thousands of hours of testimony. "Are those real?" James asked suddenly, nodding at my robes. "Very real. I was wearing them just yesterday for a civil trial." Breach of contract case. The plaintiff's attorney tried to argue that a verbal agreement superseded a written contract with explicit terms. It didn't go well for him. David cleared his throat. "Mr. Quentin, speaking off the record, have you considered filing a countersuit for harassment?" "I have," I said. "But honestly, I moved here for peace and quiet, not more litigation. I deal with enough of that at work. I was hoping this could be resolved reasonably, but Mrs. Sheffield doesn't seem interested in reason." Patricia returned, and her expression was tight. "I've just spoken with Mrs. Sheffield. She's insisting we proceed with the filing." "Then proceed," I said. "But I want you to know that I will be filing a countersuit, not just for harassment, but for violations of Arizona HOA statutes, improper assessment of fines, failure to follow proper dispute resolution procedures, and abuse of authority. I'll also be requesting attorney's fees, which in Arizona are mandatory if the HOA is found to have acted unreasonably. And I'll be filing complaints with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA management companies, regarding every single violation of state law that I've documented over the past 6 months." The three lawyers looked at each other. Years of experience had taught me how to read body language, and I could see the moment when they realized they'd been sold a lemon by their client. "We'll convey your position to Mrs. Sheffield," Patricia said finally. "You'll be receiving the formal complaint within the week." "I look forward to it," I said. "Have a good day." I closed the door before they could respond and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The adrenaline was real, even though I'd maintained perfect composure. I just essentially declared war on my HOA, and there was no going back now. I pulled out my phone and called my longtime friend, Marcus Patterson. Marcus was a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. We'd gone to law school together, and he'd saved me more than once when I needed advice outside my area of expertise. "Brandon," he answered on the second ring. "It's 9 in the morning on a Saturday. This better be good." The HOA just sent 3 lawyers to my house. I answered the door in my judge robes. There was a pause, then Marcus burst out laughing. "You did not." "I absolutely did. And they're filing suit against me for $8,000 in HOA fines." "8,000?" The laughter stopped. "For what?" I filled him in on everything, from the mailbox to the wreath to Wendy's apparent vendetta. Marcus listened without interrupting, which meant he was taking it seriously. "Okay," he said when I finished. "First thing Monday morning, we're filing a countersuit. This is textbook harassment, and Arizona courts don't like HOAs that abuse their authority. But Brandon, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go nuclear on this? HOA litigation can get nasty." "Marcus, I spent 19 years dealing with nasty. I've had defendants threaten me in open court. I've had attorneys try to intimidate me with motions they knew were frivolous. I've been investigated by judicial review boards for decisions that were perfectly lawful but politically unpopular. I'm not afraid of Wendy Sheffield and her petty tyranny." "Fair enough. Send me every document you have. Every violation notice, every response, every piece of correspondence. I want meeting minutes, financial records, everything. We're going to bury them in their own paperwork." We talked for another 20 minutes, strategizing. By the time I hung up, I felt better. I wasn't just some homeowner getting bullied by an overzealous HOA. I was a judge with resources, knowledge, and a friend who loved nothing more than taking down HOA boards that overstepped their authority. The rest of Saturday passed quietly. I spent it organizing my documents, creating a timeline of every interaction with the HOA, and drafting notes for Marcus. I also did something I probably should have done months ago. I started going through the HOA's own records, which were available to all homeowners upon request. What I found was illuminating. Wendy Sheffield had been HOA president for 4 years. In that time, the HOA's legal expenses had tripled, while the community amenities had deteriorated. The pool that was supposed to be resurfaced every 5 years hadn't been touched in 7. The landscaping contract had gone to a company owned by Wendy's brother-in-law at twice the rate of the previous vendor. And most interesting, there were several payments to Morrison, Chen, and associates over the past 2 years for legal consultations that weren't itemized. This wasn't just about my mailbox. This was about an HOA board that had been running the community like their personal fiefdom, and I'd just become their biggest problem. Sunday morning, I went for a run through the neighborhood. It was early, just after 6, and the Arizona sun was still low enough that the heat was bearable. I just rounded the corner onto Desert Vista Drive when I saw a small crowd gathered near the community mailboxes. As I got closer, I recognized several of my neighbors. Tom Mitchell, who lived 3 houses down from me, Sarah and David Chen, a young couple with twin toddlers, Frank Delgado, a retired firefighter, and standing in the middle of them, holding what looked like a printed email, was Tom. "Brandon," Tom called when he saw me. "You need to see this." I slowed to a walk and took the paper he held out. It was an email from Wendy Sheffield to all HOA members, sent at 11 p.m. the previous night. "Dear Sunset Ridge community members," it began. "It has come to the board's attention that a resident of our community has been flagrantly violating HOA regulations and has now threatened legal action against the board for simply trying to maintain our community standards. This resident has shown complete disregard for the rules that keep our property values high and our neighborhood beautiful. The board will not be intimidated by threats or bullying, and we will pursue all legal remedies to ensure compliance. We ask for your support as we defend our community against those who think they are above the rules. It didn't name me specifically, but it didn't have to. In a community of 238 houses, everyone knew who'd been getting violation notices. "This is garbage," Tom said flatly. "Brandon, I've watched you fix every single thing she's complained about. You've got the nicest maintained front yard on the block." "She's out of control," Sarah Chen added. "She tried to fine us because our kids' toys were visible from the street. They're toddlers. Where are they supposed to play?" "I got a violation notice because my car was in my driveway overnight," Frank said. "My own driveway. Apparently there's some rule that cars have to be in the garage between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. I've lived here for 12 years and never heard that rule before." I handed the email back to Tom. "How many of you have gotten violation notices in the past few months?" Everyone raised their hands. "This is important," I said. "Are any of you planning to attend the next HOA meeting?" "When is it?" Sarah asked. "Tuesday night, 7 p.m. at the community center. And I think it's going to be very well attended." We talked for another 15 minutes. It turned out that Wendy's reign of terror had affected far more people than just me. The couple at the end of the street had been fined for having a basketball hoop that was allegedly too close to the sidewalk. The retired teacher on Sagaro Lane had gotten a violation for her bird feeder attracting too many birds. The family with the service dog had been told the dog was too large to be allowed in the community, despite federal laws protecting service animals. By the time I finished my run, I had a plan forming. Wendy had made a critical mistake by sending that email. She'd rallied the community, but not behind her. She'd reminded everyone of why they were all frustrated with the HOA board, and she'd given them a reason to show up and speak out. Monday morning, I went to work as usual. I had a full docket, including a preliminary hearing for a construction defect case and a motion hearing for a custody dispute. I didn't mention anything about the HOA situation to my colleagues. It wasn't appropriate, and honestly, I didn't want the distraction. But at lunch, I met with Marcus at a sandwich shop near the courthouse. He'd brought a leather portfolio stuffed with documents. "I went through everything you sent me," he said, sliding a coffee across the table to me. "Brandon, this is even worse than you described. The HOA has violated Arizona revised statutes in at least 15 different ways. They didn't follow proper notice procedures. They assessed fines without providing the required opportunity for hearings. They failed to respond to your dispute letters within the statutory timeframe, and this bit about closed deliberations. That's a direct violation of ARS 33-1804. HOA meetings have to be open to all members. Can we win? Win. Brandon, we can destroy them, but here's what I'm thinking. We don't just file a countersuit. We file a class action on behalf of every homeowner in the community who's been wrongfully fined or harassed. We turn this into a referendum on the entire board's conduct." I considered that. Class action means more people involved, more complicated, higher stakes. It also means you're not alone in this, and it sends a message that this isn't personal vendetta. This is about fixing a broken system. "Do we have enough plaintiffs?" Marcus grinned. "I made some calls this morning. Based on the HOA records you pulled, I identified 37 homeowners who have been fined in the past 18 months. I've already spoken with 6 of them. All 6 are ready to join a suit. I bet we can get 25, maybe 30 total." "Let's do it," I said. "But I want to give Wendy one more chance to back down. The HOA meeting tomorrow night. I'm going to lay out exactly what laws they've broken and give them the opportunity to rescind all the fines and step down from the board. If they refuse, we file Wednesday morning. You think she'll back down? No, but I want it on record that I tried. Tuesday evening arrived with the kind of dry heat that makes Phoenix summers legendary. I dressed carefully, business casual but not too formal, khakis and a button-down shirt. I wanted to look professional but approachable. I also brought a briefcase with copies of every document I needed: HOA bylaws, Arizona statutes, meeting minutes, and financial records. Marcus met me in the parking lot of the community center. Ready, ready. We walked in together, and I was gratified to see the room was packed. Normally, HOA meetings drew maybe a dozen people. Tonight there had to be 70 or 80 residents crammed into a space designed for 40. People were standing along the walls and sitting on the floor. Tom was there with his wife. Sarah and David Chen had gotten a babysitter. Frank Delgado sat in the front row, arms crossed, expression stern. Wendy Sheffield sat at the head table with the other 4 board members. She was exactly what you'd picture when someone said, HOA president. Mid-50s, blonde hair styled in a way that probably required weekly salon visits, wearing a pink blazer and pearls. Her expression when she saw the crowd was priceless, cycling between confusion and alarm. The other board members looked equally uncomfortable. Vice President Gerald Thompson, a nervous man who always seemed to agree with whatever Wendy said. Treasurer Linda Martinez, who I'd heard was actually reasonable but was too intimidated by Wendy to speak up. Secretary Robert Hayes, who rarely said anything at meetings. And member-at-large Patricia Owens, who'd only joined the board 6 months ago and seemed perpetually bewildered by everything. Wendy banged the gavel, even though everyone was already quiet. This meeting of the Sunset Ridge HOA board will come to order. I see we have an unusually large turnout tonight. That's because you declared war on one of our neighbors, Tom called out. We're here to talk about it. Wendy's smile was strained. We'll have time for homeowner comments after we complete the regular agenda. First, approval of last month's minutes. Point of order, I said, standing up. According to Robert's Rules of Order, which the HOA bylaws state govern these meetings, any member may request to add an item to the agenda before it's approved. I'd like to add discussion of HOA violation procedures and board conduct. Wendy's eyes narrowed. That's not on the agenda, which is why I'm requesting it be added. Do I have a second? Second, Marcus said immediately. Third, Frank added. The motion is to add discussion of HOA violation procedures and board conduct to tonight's agenda, I said formally. All in favor? A chorus of aye filled the room, at least 50 people. All opposed, silence. Motion carries. Madam President, I believe that means we'll be discussing this matter tonight. Wendy looked like she wanted to throw her gavel at me. Fine. We'll add it to new business at the end of the meeting. Actually, I said, still standing, given the number of people here specifically for this issue, I move that we address it first. The routine business can wait. Second, Tom said. All in favor? Another overwhelming aye. Wendy's face had gone red. This is highly irregular. So is sending 3 lawyers to a homeowner's house on a Saturday morning, I replied calmly. But here we are. Shall we discuss it? Gerald Thompson leaned over and whispered something to Wendy. She listened, her expression growing darker, then nodded sharply. Very well, she said. Mr. Quentin, since you seem to have orchestrated this ambush, why don't you explain what you think the problem is? I walked to the front of the room, briefcase in hand. Marcus gave me an encouraging nod. This was my courtroom now, and I knew exactly how to command it. Thank you, Madam President, I said. I'll try to be brief. 6 months ago, I moved into this community. In that time, I've received 17 violation notices from the HOA board. 17. For reference, that's more than any other household in the community has received in the past 2 years. These violations include complaints about my mailbox color, my holiday decorations, my porch light, my trash cans, and various other minor issues. Each violation came with a fine, totaling $8,300. I heard murmurs from the crowd. Several people were taking notes. Now, I'm not here to argue whether these violations were technically accurate. Some of them were debatable, but I made every requested change. I paid for a new mailbox. I removed my wreath. I replaced my porch light. What I want to discuss is the process by which these violations were assessed and how they violate Arizona state law. Wendy stood up. This is not the time or place for legal threats, Mr. Quentin. It's exactly the time and place, because these violations affect everyone in this room. Let me walk you through the problems. First, according to Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33, Chapter 16, Section 1803, an HOA must provide written notice of any violation and allow the homeowner at least 10 days to cure the violation before assessing a fine. In my case, several fines were assessed immediately without any cure period. I pulled out documents from my briefcase. Second, ARS 33-1803 also requires that if a homeowner disputes a fine, the HOA must hold a hearing within 30 days and provide a written decision. I disputed 12 of these fines in writing. I never received a response to any of those disputes, and no hearings were scheduled. Linda Martinez, the treasurer, looked genuinely surprised. She leaned toward Wendy and said something I couldn't hear. Wendy waved her off. Third, I continued, ARS 33-1804 requires that HOA meetings be open to all members except for executive sessions dealing with specific sensitive matters like personnel or legal issues. At every meeting where my violations were discussed, I was asked to leave the room during deliberations. That's illegal. Fourth, the HOA bylaws require that all expenditures over $5,000 be approved by a vote of the membership. According to the financial records, which I obtained per my rights under ARS 33-1805, the HOA has spent over $30,000 in legal fees in the past year, none of which were approved by the membership. That caused an uproar. People were shouting questions, demanding to know where their HOA dues were going. Wendy banged the gavel repeatedly. Order! Order! Mr. Quentin is misrepresenting the facts. I'm reading directly from the Arizona Revised Statutes and the HOA's own financial records, I said. Both are public information. I have copies here if anyone wants to verify. Marcus stood up. I'm Marcus Patterson, and I'm a real estate attorney specializing in HOA law. Everything Mr. Quentin just said is accurate. This HOA board has systematically violated state law, and they've done it to multiple homeowners, not just him. And you are, Wendy demanded. I'm Mr. Quentin's attorney. I'm also prepared to represent any other homeowner in this community who's been subjected to similar treatment. In fact, I'm in the process of filing a class action lawsuit against this HOA board for violations of Arizona HOA statutes, harassment, and abuse of authority. The room exploded. Everyone was talking at once. Some people were angry, some were cheering, some were demanding explanations from the board. Wendy kept banging the gavel, but no one was paying attention to her anymore. Tom stood up and his voice cut through the chaos. I want to make a motion. I move that the HOA board immediately rescind all fines assessed in the past 18 months, pending an independent review of whether they were properly imposed under Arizona law. Second, at least 10 people shouted. That motion is out of order, Wendy said desperately. The board has the authority to assess fines. Actually, according to the HOA bylaws Article 7, Section 3, any motion made by a homeowner and seconded by 10 or more members must be put to a vote of all members present, I said. I believe we have far more than 10 seconds. Gerald Thompson was frantically flipping through a copy of the bylaws. He looked up at Wendy and nodded miserably. He's right. Wendy looked like she was about to have a stroke. Fine. All in favor of rescinding all fines. The ayes were overwhelming. I did a quick count. At least 60 people. All opposed. Wendy, Gerald, and Robert raised their hands. Linda and Patricia didn't. Motion carries, I said. All fines are rescinded pending review. Now I have a motion, Sarah Chen said, standing up with her husband beside her. I move that we hold a special election to recall the current HOA board and elect new members who will actually follow the law. The crowd erupted in applause before she even finished. The seconds came fast and furious. Wendy was shaking her head. Recall elections require a petition signed by 25% of homeowners and 30 days' notice. Then we'll start the petition tonight, Frank said. I'll sign first. People were already pulling out pens. Someone had grabbed a legal pad from the sign-in table and started a list. Within minutes, 30 people had signed. Within 10 minutes, 50. Wendy grabbed her purse and stood up. This meeting is adjourned. You can't adjourn a meeting in the middle of business, I said. That's also a violation of parliamentary procedure. Watch me, she snapped. She stormed out of the community center, heels clicking on the tile floor. Gerald and Robert scrambled after her. Linda and Patricia stayed seated, looking shell-shocked. The room was buzzing with energy. People were clustering in groups, comparing violation notices, sharing stories of HOA overreach. Marcus was surrounded by a dozen homeowners asking about the class action suit. Tom was organizing the recall petition with military precision. I found myself talking to Linda Martinez, the treasurer. She looked exhausted and relieved at the same time. I didn't know about the violations, she said quietly. I handle the finances, and I knew the legal bills were high, but Wendy always said it was necessary to maintain property values. I didn't realize she was targeting specific people. Did you know the legal expenditures weren't approved by the membership? She shook her head. Wendy said board approval was sufficient for professional services. I should have checked the bylaws more carefully. Linda, if you want to help fix this, I need accurate financial records. Everything. Where every dollar went, who approved what, all the contracts and invoices. I can get you that, she said. I'll email everything tomorrow. Patricia Owens joined us. She was younger than the other board members, maybe in her late 30s, and she looked angry. I only joined the board because Wendy said they needed help with community events. I thought I'd be planning holiday parties and neighborhood garage sales. Instead, every meeting is just Wendy complaining about violations and talking about legal action. I've been trying to quit for 3 months, but she keeps telling me I can't until my term is up. You can resign anytime you want, I told her. Board terms are a commitment, but they're not legally binding. If you want out, just submit a resignation letter. Consider it done, she said. I'll email it tonight. By the time the community center finally emptied, it was almost 10 p.m. Marcus and I were among the last to leave, along with Tom and a core group of about 15 homeowners who'd become the unofficial recall committee. That went better than expected, Marcus said as we walked to our cars. Wendy made it easy by being so unreasonable, but we're not done yet. She's going to fight this. Let her fight. We have the law on our side, we have the community on our side, and we have documentation of everything. This is the kind of case law schools use as examples of what not to do. I drove home feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I'd spent my entire career dealing with conflict and resolution, but it was different when it was personal, when it was my home and my community. For the first time in months, I felt like I was gaining control of the situation. Wednesday morning, I was in court for a settlement conference when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Just filed the class action. 23 plaintiffs. Also, you need to check the HOA email. During the lunch recess, I checked my email. Wendy had sent another message to the entire community at 6 a.m. Dear homeowners, last night's meeting was hijacked by a small group of malcontents who are trying to destroy our community. The so-called violations being complained about are nothing more than attempts to maintain the high standards that make Sunset Ridge a desirable place to live. A lawsuit has been filed against the HOA by people who simply don't want to follow the rules. This lawsuit will cost the community tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, which will come from your HOA dues. I urge everyone to ignore this recall nonsense and support your board as we defend our community. The email was signed Wendy Sheffield, HOA president, with her contact information and a line at the bottom that said protecting Sunset Ridge since 2021. I forwarded it to Marcus with a note. Is this defamation? His response came within minutes. Borderline, but definitely stupid. She's making our case for us. Over the next week, things moved fast. The recall petition gathered signatures from over 60% of the homeowners in the community. Linda Martinez provided complete financial records that revealed even more questionable expenditures, including $5,000 paid to a consulting firm that turned out to be a company owned by Wendy's husband. Patricia Owens submitted her resignation from the board, which Wendy refused to accept until Patricia sent a certified letter to the entire board and the HOA management company. The class action lawsuit was formally served to the HOA board on Friday. Marcus had assembled a case that was devastating in its detail. 23 plaintiffs, 47 separate violations of Arizona HOA statutes, and a request for damages, attorney's fees, and an injunction preventing the board from assessing any new fines until they completed training on Arizona HOA law. Wendy's response was to hire a new law firm, presumably because Morrison, Chen, and Associates had declined to represent the HOA in the class action. The new firm, Blackwell and Associates, sent a letter to all plaintiffs demanding they drop the lawsuit or face counter-suits for defamation and harassment. Marcus laughed when he showed me the letter. They can't be serious, counter-suing homeowners for asserting their legal rights. That's sanctionable conduct. I'm going to enjoy this. The special election was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the community was more active than I'd ever seen it. People were actually attending HOA meetings. Neighbors were talking to each other, comparing notes on the board's conduct. A community Facebook group that had been dormant for months suddenly had hundreds of posts about HOA reform. 6 candidates emerged to run for the 5 board positions. Tom Mitchell agreed to run for president. Linda Martinez, despite having been part of the original board, announced she'd run for treasurer again, promising transparency and accountability. 4 other homeowners stepped up for the remaining positions. A retired accountant named Helen Morris, a small business owner named Jorge Ramirez, and 2 younger residents, Amy Foster and Kevin Zhang, who said they wanted to bring common sense back to the HOA. Wendy announced she'd run for re-election as president. Gerald Thompson and Robert Hayes also filed to run again. Nobody else joined them, which meant they'd need at least 2 more people to fill a 5-person board if they won. The campaign, if you could call it that, was brutal. Wendy sent daily emails attacking the recall mob and warning about property values declining if the radical new board took over. She printed flyers and left them on every doorstep, highlighting crimes that had allegedly increased in other HOAs that abandoned their standards. The fact that she provided no data or sources for these claims didn't seem to bother her. The opposition, led by Tom, took a different approach. They focused on facts, the violations of state law, the questionable financial expenditures, the lack of transparency. They held an open forum where residents could share their experiences with the board. Over 40 people showed up, and nearly all of them had stories of unreasonable fines, ignored complaints about actual problems like broken streetlights and potholed roads, and general frustration with the board's priorities. Through all of this, I tried to maintain a low profile. I'd become the face of the recall whether I wanted to be or not, but I didn't want this to be about me personally. I wanted it to be about fixing a broken system. Still, Wendy had made it personal, sending me 2 more violation notices in 1 week, one for my front yard having excessive xeriscaping and another for my car allegedly leaking oil on my driveway. Both were absurd and easily disproven, but they showed she wasn't backing down. The class action lawsuit was proceeding through discovery. Marcus had subpoenaed all HOA records for the past 5 years, and what we were finding was worse than I'd imagined. Wendy had been systematically targeting homeowners who disagreed with her at board meetings. The husband and wife who'd questioned the landscaping contract at a meeting 2 years ago had received 9 violation notices in the following 6 months. A retired couple who'd asked for financial transparency had been fined for their rose bushes being overgrown, even though they'd won awards from the local garden club. But the real bombshell came when Marcus discovered that Wendy had been pocketing money from the HOA. It was subtle, hidden in the records as administrative expenses and reimbursements, but when we added it up over 4 years, it came to over $40,000, money for office supplies that were never purchased, mileage reimbursements for trips that didn't happen, consulting fees paid to her personal LLC. "This is embezzlement," Marcus said when he showed me the analysis. "This isn't just civil violations anymore. This is criminal." We were sitting in his office on a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks after the initial confrontation. The election was in 1 week, and the class action was scheduled for a preliminary hearing in 2 months. "Are you sure?" I asked, even though I could see the numbers myself. "Positive. I've had a forensic accountant review everything. Wendy Sheffield has been stealing from the HOA for years." "Brandon, we need to report this to the police." I sat back in my chair, processing that. As a judge, I'd seen plenty of embezzlement cases. They were usually sad affairs, people who started small and convinced themselves they'd pay it back, then spiraled into larger and larger thefts until they got caught. But this was different. This was calculated, sustained fraud over years. "If we report it now, it'll overshadow the election," I said. "If we don't report it now, she might destroy evidence, and ethically we have an obligation. This is an ongoing crime." He was right. I knew he was right. "Okay, let's go to the Phoenix Police Department. But we need to make sure this is airtight. I don't want her claiming this is retaliation for the lawsuit." Monday morning, Marcus and I met with a detective at the Phoenix Police Department's white-collar crimes unit. Detective Sarah Williamson was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened to our explanation and reviewed the documents with the kind of focus that suggested she'd seen this before. "HOA embezzlement cases are more common than people think," she said. "Usually it's treasurers, but presidents can do it too if the board isn't paying attention. How did she get away with it for so long? The board rubber stamped everything she proposed, Marcus explained. And the treasurer, Linda Martinez, trusted her. Linda's not a forensic accountant. She just processed the bills and reimbursements that Wendy submitted. You have cooperation from Miss Martinez. Absolutely, I said. She's horrified by what we found. She's provided full documentation and will testify if needed. Detective Williamson made notes. All right. I'm going to need copies of all these financial records, your forensic analysis, and statements from Miss Martinez and any other board members who will cooperate. This will take time to investigate. We're talking about 4 years of financial records. But based on what you've shown me, there's probable cause for an investigation. How long before you can make an arrest? Marcus asked. Depends on what we find. If everything you're showing me holds up, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. We'll need to interview witnesses, review bank records, verify the expenditures. We'll also need to determine if this was just Miss Sheffield or if other board members were involved. We left the police station feeling like we'd crossed a threshold. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was a criminal investigation, and Wendy had no idea it was coming. The election was held on a Tuesday evening in the community center. Over 200 homeowners showed up to vote, which was apparently a record for Sunset Ridge. The voting was by secret ballot, with each homeowner receiving a paper ballot listing all the candidates. The atmosphere was tense. Wendy and her supporters clustered on one side of the room, shooting hostile looks at everyone else. Tom and the reform candidates mingled with homeowners, answering questions and thanking people for voting. I cast my ballot and then stood outside with Marcus, watching people come and go. The turnout was extraordinary, nearly 90% of the community. Whatever happens tonight, this community is never going to be the same, Marcus said. That's a good thing. This should never have gotten this bad in the first place. The polls closed at 8 p.m. The ballot counting was conducted by a neutral third party, a representative from the HOA management company who'd flown in from Nevada specifically for this purpose. The entire process was transparent, with representatives from both sides watching to ensure fairness. It took 90 minutes to count all the ballots. At 9:30 p.m., the management company representative stepped to the front of the room and read the results. Tom Mitchell was elected president with 73% of the vote. Linda Martinez won treasurer with 68%. Helen Morris, Jorge Ramirez, and Amy Foster won the other 3 board positions with similar margins. Kevin Zhang came in 6th, missing a spot by only a few votes. Wendy Sheffield received 31 votes out of 214 cast. Gerald Thompson got 27. Robert Hayes got 23. The room erupted in cheers. People were hugging, shaking hands, taking photos. Tom made his way to the front, looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed. "Thank you all," he said when the noise died down. "This is a new beginning for Sunset Ridge. Our first priority is to review every policy and procedure to ensure we're in compliance with Arizona law. Our second priority is transparency. Every financial record, every board decision, every meeting will be open and accessible to all homeowners. And our third priority is to remember that we're a community, not a dictatorship. We're here to serve you, not rule over you." More applause. I saw Wendy gathering her things, her face a mask of fury. She marched toward the exit without a word to anyone. Gerald and Robert followed her like lost puppies. The new board held a brief organizational meeting that night, officially accepting their positions and scheduling their first meeting for the following week. One of their first acts was to vote unanimously to drop the lawsuit against me and the other plaintiffs. acknowledging that the violations had been improperly assessed. Marcus immediately filed a motion to dismiss the case with prejudice, meaning the HOA could never refile those same claims. He also filed a motion for attorney's fees under Arizona's prevailing party statute. The new board agreed to pay those fees without contest, acknowledging that the previous board's conduct had been unreasonable. Everything seemed to be wrapping up nicely. Except for the criminal investigation, which was proceeding quietly in the background. 2 weeks after the election, Detective Williamson called me. "Judge Quentin, I wanted to update you. We've completed our investigation and we're ready to move forward. We've verified that Miss Sheffield embezzled over $42,000 from the HOA over a 4-year period. We've also found evidence that she falsified documents and attempted to obstruct our investigation by deleting emails. We'll be executing an arrest warrant tomorrow morning." "Thank you for letting me know, Detective. There's one more thing. Based on evidence we found, we believe Gerald Thompson was aware of at least some of the embezzlement and failed to report it. We're considering charges against him as well for being an accessory after the fact." I wasn't surprised. Gerald had always struck me as someone more interested in staying on Wendy's good side than in doing the right thing. Wednesday morning, I was in court when I got a text from Tom. "Wendy just got arrested. It's all over the neighborhood Facebook group." I waited until the lunch recess to check social media. Sure enough, someone had posted a video of Phoenix police officers escorting Wendy out of her house in handcuffs. She was shouting something about persecution and illegal search and seizure. The comments on the post were a mix of shock and vindication. The local news picked up the story that evening. Former HOA president arrested for embezzlement ran on 3 different Phoenix stations. The reporters had done their homework, interviewing homeowners and reviewing public records. One station even interviewed Marcus, who gave a carefully worded statement about HOA oversight and accountability. Wendy was charged with theft, fraudulent schemes and artifices, and forgery, all felonies in Arizona. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she posted the next day. Gerald Thompson was charged as an accessory and released on his own recognizance. The prosecution was handled by the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. I didn't have any involvement, obviously, since I was a potential witness, and it would be a conflict of interest. But I followed the case through public records and conversations with the prosecutor's office. Wendy's attorney, predictably, tried to argue that this was retaliation for her strong leadership of the HOA and that she was being persecuted by disgruntled homeowners. The judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed deposits to Wendy's personal account that corresponded exactly with HOA reimbursement checks. Emails showed her directing the treasurer to process payments for services that were never rendered, and the forensic analysis was bulletproof. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out, but it never got that far. 3 months after her arrest, Wendy accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of fraudulent schemes. In exchange, the other charges were dropped. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with credit for time served, and ordered to pay full restitution of $42,000 plus interest. Gerald Thompson took a plea deal as well, receiving probation and community service in exchange for his testimony against Wendy. Through all of this, life in Sunset Ridge improved dramatically. The new HOA board implemented policies that were reasonable and legal. They hired a new management company that actually responded to homeowner concerns. They resurfaced the pool, fixed the potholes, and updated the community playground. Most importantly, they stopped the endless stream of petty violation notices. People could hang wreaths without fear. They could park in their driveways. They could live in their homes without feeling like they were under constant surveillance. I finally felt like I could relax in my own home. I planted a new garden, installed a fountain in my backyard, and even got a dog, a rescue golden retriever named Bailey. No violation notices came. No lawyers appeared at my door. It was peaceful in a way I'd hoped for when I first moved in. Tom turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He was fair, reasonable, and genuinely interested in making the community better. We became good friends, often having coffee on Saturday mornings and talking about everything from neighborhood issues to sports to our families. Marcus continued his real estate practice, but the Sunset Ridge case became something of a calling card for him. He started getting calls from homeowners in other communities facing similar situations. He even gave a presentation at the Arizona State Bar about HOA law and homeowner rights. As for me, I went back to my regular routine of work and home, but with a renewed appreciation for both. The experience had reminded me why I'd become a judge in the first place. To ensure that the law was applied fairly, to protect people from abuse of power, and to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. One evening, about a year after the initial confrontation, I was sitting on my front porch with Bailey at my feet when Tom walked over with 2 beers. "Thought you might want one of these," he said, handing me a bottle. "Thanks. What's the occasion?" "No occasion. Just wanted to say thanks for everything you did. This neighborhood is a completely different place now. People are happy. They're not afraid of their own HOA. That's because you stood up to Wendy when the rest of us were too intimidated." "I had advantages most people don't have," I said. "I knew the law, I had resources, I had Marcus. Anyone else might not have been able to fight back the way I did." "Maybe, but you did fight back, and that gave the rest of us the courage to do the same. That matters." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and pink. Bailey dozed contentedly, occasionally twitching in dreams of chasing rabbits or squirrels. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Tom said. "Why did you really answer the door in your judge robes that day? Was it just to intimidate the lawyers?" I laughed. "Honestly, it was partly that. But it was also because I was tired of being treated like I was helpless. Those lawyers showed up thinking they could bully me into compliance. I wanted them to understand immediately that they'd picked the wrong target. The robes were a statement. I'm not just some random homeowner you can push around. I know the law better than you do, and I'm ready to use that knowledge." Well, it worked. Marcus told me those lawyers called Wendy the same day and told her she was on her own if she wanted to pursue the lawsuit. Smart lawyers. They recognized a losing case when they saw one. Tom raised his beer. "To standing up to tyranny, even when it comes in the form of a middle-aged woman in a pink blazer." I clinked my bottle against his. "To community, and to neighbors who have each other's backs." The legal aftermath continued for a while longer. The class action lawsuit was officially settled, with the HOA agreeing to pay attorneys' fees and implement policy changes to prevent future abuses. Every plaintiff received a formal apology from the new board, which was more meaningful than any monetary payment could have been. Wendy served 18 months of her 3-year sentence before being released on parole. I heard she moved to California to live with her daughter, the same daughter who'd wanted to buy my house. I never saw or heard from her again. The experience taught me several important lessons. First, that knowledge really is power, especially knowledge of the law. Second, that standing up to bullies, even institutional bullies like an HOA board, is worth the effort. And third, that communities are only as strong as the people who are willing to get involved and hold their leaders accountable. It also reminded me why I loved being a judge. Every day in my courtroom, I got to ensure that the law was applied fairly, that people had a voice, and that power wasn't abused. The HOA situation had been a personal application of those same principles, and it had reinforced my commitment to justice in all its forms. I continued living in Sunset Ridge, and it truly became the peaceful community I'd hoped for. The HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and addressing legitimate concerns without harassment or overreach. Property values did increase, but not because of draconian enforcement of petty rules. They increased because people actually wanted to live in a place where they felt respected and valued. Years later, I'd sometimes tell the story of the 3 lawyers and the judge robes to colleagues or friends. It always got a laugh, but it also sparked serious conversations about HOA governance and homeowner rights. Several judges I knew had their own HOA horror stories, and more than one admitted they wished they'd handled it the way I did. The truth is, I got lucky. Lucky that I had the knowledge and resources to fight back. Lucky that I had Marcus as a friend and attorney. Lucky that the community rallied together instead of staying divided. Lucky that the law was clear and on our side. Not every homeowner in an HOA dispute has those advantages. That's why, in the years since, I've made it a point to educate people about their rights when it comes to HOAs. I've given talks at community centers and libraries about Arizona HOA law. I've written articles for local publications about what homeowners should know before buying in an HOA community. And I've always been available to give advice to neighbors and friends dealing with their own HOA issues. Because at the end of the day, your home should be your sanctuary, not a source of constant stress and conflict. You should be able to enjoy your property without fear that someone's going to measure your wreath or time your trash cans. And if an HOA board oversteps their authority, you should know that you have rights and remedies available. The judicial robes hanging in my closet served their purpose that Saturday morning. They made a statement, shifted the power dynamic, and set the tone for everything that followed. But the real work came afterward, gathering evidence, understanding the law, building community support, and seeing the process through to the end. Looking back now, I wouldn't change a thing. Well, maybe I would have bought the house without an HOA in the first place. But given the choice between backing down or standing up, I'm glad I chose to stand. And I'm glad I had the perfect outfit for the occasion. Bailey stirred at my feet, looking up at me with those soulful golden retriever eyes that seemed to ask if it was time for dinner. I checked my watch. 6 o'clock, right on schedule. "Come on, boy," I said, standing up from the porch chair. "Let's get you fed." As we walked into the house, I glanced back at the quiet street, the well-maintained yards, the neighbors out walking their dogs or washing their cars. This was what a community was supposed to look like. Not perfect, but peaceful. Not uniform, but harmonious. Not ruled by fear, but built on mutual respect. And somewhere in California, Wendy Sheffield was hopefully learning the same lesson I'd tried to teach her from the beginning. That power without accountability is tyranny, that rules without reason are oppression, and that people will only tolerate being pushed around for so long before they push back. I closed the door behind me, leaving my judicial robes hanging in the closet where they belonged, ready for Monday morning when I'd return to my courtroom and continue the work of ensuring justice for everyone who stood before my bench. But for now, I was just Brandon Quentin, homeowner, neighbor, and proud resident of a community that had learned to govern itself with wisdom, fairness, and respect for the rule of law. The house was quiet except for the sound of Bailey crunching his kibble in the kitchen. Outside, the Arizona sun was setting on another peaceful day in Sunset Ridge. And in that moment, everything felt exactly as it should be.